So as I mentioned before, if you've got good source code management practices in place, that helps your architecture team develop a better software systems architecture. And that's also part of what you have to consider when you're creating a build architecture. Overly complex builds are horrible. I've had a few times where colleagues of mine who were a whole lot smarter than me created build frameworks that were pretty fancy, and in fact nobody understood what they were doing. So make sure you keep your builds as really simple, and you want to make sure that in this rapidly changing architecture that you get a heads up so that you don't find yourself caught where you don't know how to build the code that is being brought to you. So Dean Leffingwell, in his book Agile Software Requirements, talks about the Agile release train, and I don't think it's an accident. On the cover of my book, we used a Dutch train because we felt that showed such a beautiful sense of motion. So Dean talks about the Agile release train, making each product release a successful and routine event, an event that is indeed planned and eagerly anticipated, yet one that happens almost on autopilot. Such a great way to phrase it. Now, change control is important, and I didn't include that as a separate function because I think one of the cool things about good Agile practices is that there's lots of implicit change control, just like there's lots of implicit testing. So in your Scrum stand-up meetings, you're talking about change control, and your backlog and your Agile release planning. Make sure that you've got a change advisory board as is recommended in the ITIL framework. That means a group of subject matter experts who understand the downstream impact of a change on any particular software asset. So if you close port 23 on a particular program, you got to go ask Henry, because he's the guy who actually knows what's going to happen when you close port 23. Because this software, again, our systems are more and more complex. So you want lightweight change control, but you also want to make sure that you don't drop any balls. So I like to talk about the golden hour. Now, I'm taking this kind of from my training as an emergency medical technician. When we do a rescue, we talk about the golden hour. That's the first hour after someone's injured. You can respond quickly and make sure that you take good care of that person. Well, I like to see the build get brought down to an hour. You want to automate the build and packaging procedure. You want to automate the entire release process. Structure it into separate components and then marry it together as a tool chain. A lot of times I've seen that we could take a 3-day build and bring it down to 1 hour. That's why I call it the golden hour. You want a reliable and repeatable process. Remember, Agile doesn't have a focus on process, but you still at times need to have effective processes. While we believe in the things on the right, we believe in the other things on the left more. Well, sometimes you need a repeatable process, and this is one of them. You need a repeatable process for your build, and it's got to be fully traceable. So in environment configuration, wow, this is an area a lot of people really don't focus on enough. That's why I made it number 3. You want to be able to rapidly create environments for test, integration, QA, or production. You want to be able to keep an eye on those environments and what we call surveillance, and immediately detect any unauthorized changes. You also want to be able to proactively manage your environments and have monitoring environments. You know, that really does take us over to Aiello, which is a great framework that gives us some very wise advice. And there we talk about configuration management databases, which are typically appliances that keep an eye on a particular aspect. They feed information up to what's called the federated CMDB, and that information gets fed up to the configuration management system, which is usually a relational database. In this context, I'm not talking about a source code management tool. I'm talking about CMDBs that watch your environment, tell you when things change, and feed that up to a console in the database so you can keep an eye on what's going on. This is essential in any large operation, and it's part of the guidance that you get in Aiello. I've written a number of articles about this. You can certainly drop me a line and I'll send you the links to them. Another thing you want to consider is the Definitive Media Library, which is a repository that contains all of your production releases. So DevOps has been taking the industry by storm. We'll talk about that a little bit further, and that is really where Agile and Aiello come together. Puppet and Chef are two of the great tools that are out there. There's also some fantastic commercial tools that I've been getting involved with. Again, offline, if you send me a note, I'll send you some links. But Puppet and Chef are two products that help you automate the provisioning of a server, patching, configuration of operating systems, application components. It provides you the systems integration framework. It's scalable, it's extensible, and these tools are being used in many of the commercial products that make it much easier to manage complex environments and also be able to scale to set up hundreds if not thousands of environments. Now that we have some environments set up, and we've talked about the importance of being able to create and manage them, we want to automatically build, package, and deploy. And of course, that takes us right to continuous integration. Now, I didn't mean to minimize the importance of CI. Continuous integration is really important. And of course, Martin Fowler has done a great job at marketing this concept and really hammering home how important early integration is, how important lean build automation is, and providing a platform for end-to-end automation, as well as a full framework for testing. And after you have built and run your unit tests, you always want to be able to deploy the built release to a test environment. So always consider scalability in continuous integration. What I find sometimes folks get involved with tools that are very hard to maintain. You may have multiple teams. You might not want them modifying the same XML file, so you might want to have separate instances. So some tools are really better than others. I don't want to get into specific tools, but there's, not in this webinar, but there's lots of different products that are out there, and some of them scale a whole lot better than others. And there's also the ease of use to consider and the full feature set. So the fifth thing to consider is continuous deployment. And I'm going to quote my colleague Jez Humble in just a moment, but in continuous deployment, you always want to consider rapid iterative deployment. You want to automate everything. One of the things that I found is really effective is keeping the deployment small. When you have a big bang deployment where you're changing everything under the sun, there's a lot more risk, and this is all about minimizing risk. By having the ability to quickly and easily deploy a small change, that really does go a long way to making this much easier. It makes it much easier to also deal with problems if they occur because you know exactly what you changed. And that's not always true in a big bang deployment where you're putting in 4 or 5 different changes. Maybe you've got a particular window when you can make changes. It's a lot harder to figure out what went wrong if it doesn't work. And the ability to fall back is just as important as the ability to promote your release forward. Sometimes I've been in environments where that wasn't possible. There are technical reasons why it can be very difficult, but I do want to emphasize just how important it is to have the ability to fall back as part of continuous deployment. So some of the common problems that we do run into: deployments can be risky. If we miss a single step, it can result in problems. I remember one time I was in the middle of doing a deployment, and I had a very good checklist, and I was going through step by step, doing each of the steps that I needed to do. It was kind of complex, and I was really having a lot of fun with it. And one of my colleagues from the project management office comes over and knocks on my desk and says, "Bob, I really need your updates to the project plan right now." And I looked at him, and my head was in the release. I really didn't want to talk to him and try to remember where I was at with my estimates. But he insisted, and after I gave him the update to my estimates and he put that in the project plan, I looked back at my checklist and I couldn't remember where I was. So missing a single step in any kind of a release process is a very, very bad thing. You want to make sure that you make that impossible. Too many mistakes are also a common problem. It's very common in deployments for people to really find that there's a very high risk of getting things wrong, and that's just not necessary. And then no way back. Not being able to back out a change that you've made, or not being able to tell if that change was made. And the biggest problem that I find is an assumption of defeat. I find some teams where they've just given up on deployment. They've decided deployment is Friday night, ruin the whole weekend. You have to do deployment, just give up. It's going to go bad. And I have to tell you that I think one of the biggest things we have to do is get past this silly mentality and realize that we can do automated deployment effectively. That's what continuous deployment and continuous integration are all about, and there's no reason to always assume defeat. That's often the first thing that I address in a team that's having some trouble with their release management process. Now, Jez Humble and David Farley do a great job of defining the deployment pipeline, and I felt an awful lot of feelings of deja vu when I read this. A deployment pipeline is an automated implementation of your application's build, deploy, test, and release process. And you really want to be able to set it up so that you've got that. And the aim of the pipeline is to make building, deploying, testing, and releasing software visible to everyone involved, improve the feedback so that problems are identified and resolved as early in the process as possible. And you also want to be able to enable the teams to deploy and release any version of their software to any environment at will through a fully automated process. So some of the anti-patterns, some of the things that Jez points out we need to really avoid is deploying software manually. Should never be doing that. That's the situation I described before. Deploying to production-like environment only after the development is complete. Now what we mean by this is you want to be deploying to production-like environments as early as possible. If you're going to deploy to a QA environment and it's very different than production, you better identify the risk. Because when you finally deploy to production, things may not go the same as deploying to a QA environment that is very different. And the manual configuration of production environments is also an anti-pattern. You want to be able to automate the provisioning of the environment, as we talked about with Chef and, of course, Puppet, as well as some of the commercial tools that are out there. Now, here's something that a lot of people don't really focus on, and it's really in my top 7 things to consider in Agile CM. Verification and validation should be implicit in every single step of the Agile CM effort. Deming's the father of quality management and someone that I have studied for a very long time, said build quality in. That means, you want to make sure that every step of your process is validating itself. Verification and validation, are you passing your tests, and are you testing the right things? So you want to make sure you're testing your own build, package, and deploy framework. A simple example of that I had in my work is in a very complex Maven build. I found whenever it didn't work right, my colleagues would go and check for a particular jar that was missing. This was always their symptom when I told them that it looked like something had gone wrong. And so what I did was, in our build framework, I actually set it up so that I would test for that jar proactively. So you want to build your own verification and validation into all your build, package, and deployment scripts. You also want to be able to do a configuration audit, which really refers to being able to ascertain the exact version of your code that's running in production. That's what a configuration audit is. There's both a functional and a physical configuration audit. And that is, do you have the right binaries there, and are they performing what they're supposed to be in a manner in which they're supposed to? I also like to consider the ergonomics of the automation. Now what I mean by that is, if we were looking at the cockpit of a plane, you would see a set of controls that are very easy to read. There's traceability. We know what the pilot has been doing. You want to make sure that you make it almost impossible to make mistakes. And I think we want to do the same thing when we set up our build, package, and deployment automation. Now, DevOps